Welcome back, everybody, to Ranked. I'm Charles.
I'm McCurdy.
I'm Patterson.
I'm Scott.
And Nathan.
We are ranking all of the films from the James Bond franchise, one by one. By the end of this franchise's season, we'll have ranked the entire series from top to bottom. So if you want to follow along, go ahead and subscribe, or go f*** yourself. Tonight, we are discussing From Russia with Love, Film 2, starring our man Sean Connery. From Russia with Love brings Bond to Istanbul, Turkey, where he's been tasked with bringing in a Russian defector, a sexy blonde woman, who claims she'll hand over the Russians' top-secret Lektor Decoder if he'll give her an English breakfast with extra sausage. What Bond doesn't know is that it's all a ploy by Spectre, playing the English and Russians against each other so that they can steal the Lektor for themselves.
After the success of Dr. No, United Artists was pretty happy and decided to double the budget for this film to make it $2 million instead of $1.1 million. Producers Salzman and Broccoli picked From Russia with Love because it was on the list of JFK's favorite books. Again, he is president currently at this time, if you remember. And sadly and ironically, it was the last film he viewed in the White House before his assassination. Daniela Bianchi plays Tatiana Romanova. She was a 1960s Miss Universe runner-up. Her first scene with Bond, however, this is an interesting note, where she's filmed in the hotel, was later used as screen test for following Bonds as well as Bond girls. Typically in a Hollywood movie, sometimes they'll do what's called a screen test. It's kind of like a bigger audition so that they can really look at the actor that they have and see, hey, is this person going to really work out for this scene? So they would use that particular scene where she gets in bed and, they meet each other for the first time. They would reuse that scene over and over again with subsequent Bond girls as well as people that would play Bond in the following films.
So you're Tatiana Romanova.
My friends call me Tanya.
My friends call me Bond. James Bond.
It'd be awesome if they just kept that one hotel set forever, that they could just shoot that scene over and over and over.
Kerim Bey.
This is kind of one of the more tragic stories of this film. If I butcher his name, I apologize, but he's actually played by a Mexican actor, Pedro Armendáriz. He was diagnosed with cancer, I think sometime either during this filming or just right before the filming. And I was looking into research. Apparently, him and a lot of other actors worked on this film called The Conqueror, I think is what it was called, that filmed fairly close to U.S. testing sites for atomic bombs.
Tempting but unwise, my brother. Listen to me.
So they kind of link that as the reason why he got cancer.
Wow.
Damn.
But he was very ill during the production, so they decided the production accommodated for him. They filmed a lot of his scenes first. Even though they did film it in Istanbul for a lot of this movie, they still moved a lot of stuff to the United Kingdom to film those scenes there instead.
He sucked it up, man. Kerim Bey is by far one of my favorite Bond allies, right?
Yeah.
Felix Leiter's come and go, and they're always cool, but Kerim Bey is so unique and I guess just pleasant. He's just, it's absolutely tragic when he gets it because he's just so nice to be around and he's like an old school patriarch. He's like Abraham. I'm surprised he didn't have multiple wives, right? He has a million sons and he probably does. I mean, his wife was young, so guaranteed that guy was swapping wives regularly. And he's just like a cool ass dude. He's like this fat ass old guy who's still just banging,
Everybody in Turkey is his son.
All of my key employees are my sons. Blood is the best security in this business.
You must have quite an establishment here.
Biggest family payroll in Turkey.
But at some point after he was done or kind of close to being done, he just couldn't take it anymore. He ended up killing himself and he was friends with Ernest Hemingway. So he apparently went the same way as Hemingway did. If you didn't know, Hemingway shot himself with a shotgun. So that was kind of one of those sadder stories about this film. And so anything that they still needed, they ended up using stunt doubles to replace him for other scenes.
I'm never going to be able to watch this movie again without thinking about how my man Kerim Bey shortly thereafter blew his own head off. That's very tragic.
Cheers to that poor man.
There are two things I wanted to point out. And one, I'm going to say this sounds fucking badass. So we've talked about Terence Young, who directed Dr. No. So when they were filming the boat chase scene, apparently Terence Young's helicopter crashed into the water.
Damn.
Nobody gets killed, thank God, but they were all minorly injured. He gets out of the helicopter and he's like, I'm ready to go back to work. Like he's like, I'm gonna go fucking film the rest of the scene. And the producers were like, dude, you just went through a helicopter crash. And apparently Salzman wanted to bring in famous filmmaker David Lean to finish it. But he was like, no, I'm good. And so he just came back and he starts filming the rest of the movie. So that was like one instance with this film that was kind of nuts. The other thing...
God, that's f***ing admirable, man.
That's
so
a
badass.
fucking badass director move, is just be like, no, I'm good. Let's keep going. But apparently Daniela Bianchi, her driver, it was 6 a.m. in the morning, and apparently he crashed because he fell asleep at the wheel. And they had to move all of her scenes because she had bruises, like visible bruises on her face. So I just wanted to point out that they had all these problems with this movie, like all these behind the scenes, not to mention one actor killing himself during the production. But, you know, there were other things that happened during this movie, and it still came out to be like one of the best films in the Bond franchise.
Well, wait. Did
Kerim
Kerim Bey kill himself before the movie was done with production?
According to Wiki, the film principal photography was April 1st, 1963, and wrapped on August 23rd. His suicide was June 18 of 63, so it was during. And it does also mention here that he experienced a lot of pain and apparently was limping, and the Wikipedia page says you can see it in the film, but I didn't notice.
To put up my cruel hat for a minute, what they should have done, Kerim Bey should have been like, look, I have radiation poisoning. I don't give a f***. I'm going to blow my head off. And they're like, well, wait a second. We have a scene where a helicopter needs to crash.
God.
Can we put you in the Can you fly the helicopter?
That's
We can blow it up and we'll film the helicopter crashing, because that helicopter crash is weak shit. And if I'm Kerim Bey, if I'm Pedro, I'm like, guys, I'm out. I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a shotgun in my mouth, or you can let me fly that f***ing helicopter, and I'm gonna drive it into the ground, and you can explode it with style, and I'm gonna go out that way because I love my job.
You're going to get a real, actual helicopter crash film.
Instead, we have the shittiest helicopter crash ever, where they clearly just put it there and then they just blew it up in place, rather than that raining fire, you know? Like Kerim Bey just like,
that is brutal.
and then they would have dedicated the film to him, you know what I mean?
Not to be morbid, but apparently he killed himself by shooting himself in the chest, not in the head, which sounds worse to me.
Man.
Yeah, that's much worse.
That sounds fucking worse.
God, people are such fucking pussies today. I mean, the amount of people that are, I couldn't do this, that, or the other because I was tired. And this guy's got fucking radiation poisoning. He's like Dr. No, and he's still acting his fucking life out, you know, for the sake of the fucking movie. And then when he's done, he goes and he takes a shotgun to the fucking chest like a fucking man.
Yeah.
Goddamn. I'm drinking a Chianti. Somebody asked me if it's white. The answer is no, it's the red kind.
White Chianti, monsieur? No, the red kind.
Red wine with fish. Well, that should have told me something.
Speaking of drinking red wine with fish, our man Red Grant, or Donald Red Grant, is played by Robert Shaw. If you're familiar with the film Jaws, you will know that this is the same man who plays the ship captain.
Yep. Lifeless eyes, black eyes like a doll's eyes.
He plays a incredible heavy to Connery, and apparently Connery's actually 4 inches taller than him, so he would actually stand on apple boxes to look more intimidating to Connery.
That fight scene between them at the end, and just seeing Grant's body language and all that, I kind of saw him as reminiscent of Daniel Craig. Imagine if Daniel Craig had lived back then and had been cast as Grant.
Yeah.
How amazing it would have been to see that scene as a Daniel Craig switcheroo.
I got those vibes when you see him in the gypsy camp and he's wearing the gloves. And apparently it's been told that Craig wanted to wear gloves when he was in Skyfall, or either that or Spectre. So when I see him wearing gloves and a suit and he's got a gun, it kind of like, I get that exact same vibe you're talking about. Yep. And speaking of that fight scene, it took them 3 weeks to film. And apparently most of the stunts were done by Connery and Shaw. So they did most of the stunts themselves. And
it shows that scene was
definitely
awesome.
shows.
It just came off as authentic.
So last week we went on at length about Dr. No. We obviously didn't have anything to compare it to, but here tonight we're going to actually do our first ranking right now. So do any of you have a proposition for an official ranking for From Russia with Love?
I'm going to say From Russia with Love, number 1.
Number 1. I'm going to second that myself. And I'm going to go ahead and assume that everybody agrees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Officially, we have a new number 1, so that's something to celebrate for sure.
By unanimous consensus.
Yeah. Just by default, From Russia with Love is superior to Dr. No, just in terms of scope. I think overall, that's the way it had to be. It's almost like Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, where the first one, you got to give it up to Dr. No for how it set the stage. It set the standard so well, but that standard still didn't have a budget behind it. Like we talked about, they did Dr. No because it was a simple story with just a couple of settings, and it's really not complicated. And what the bad guy's trying to do is not complicated at all. And in fact, what the bad guy's doing is so in the background of the movie, it's literally just something that you see on some TV screens, and who cares? I mean, at that point, you care more about him saving Honey Rider than the rockets, because the rockets just kind of seem like inconsequential. You know, it's not like there's any astronauts on there that you know anything about or care
there's not
about.
really any stakes to Dr. No on the same scale as from what you're getting with From Russia with Love.
Whereas with this, the entire plot is what the bad guy's trying to do. From beginning to end, again, Dr. No, it's just the ending where it's like, oh, they're toppling these rockets. And Bond's aware throughout the plot that they're toppling rockets, but nobody cares about that. We care about solving this murder mystery. But in From Russia with Love, from beginning to end, it's about the Lektor. What's interesting is that right away there's that chess master is saying, we're going to get revenge on Bond, and we're going to get the Lektor, and we're going to stir up trouble between the East and West. It's a direct sequel to everything that Dr. No laid out at that dinner table.
East, west, just points of the compass, each as stupid as the other.
Naturally, neither the Russians nor the British will be aware that they are now working for us.
Dr. No tried to recruit Bond. Again, he didn't kill Bond because he thought this guy's pretty smart. Spectre could use him.
I was curious to see what kind of a man you were. I thought there might even be a place for you with Spectre.
It's almost like Bond then confirmed that he's too much of a cowboy and a patriot to turn, so they use him to get what they need and kill him. It's absolutely brilliant.
As an added refinement, I think that Spectre will probably have the chance of a personal revenge for the killing of our operative, Dr. No, because the man the British will almost certainly use on a mission of this sort would be their agent, James Bond.
The objective of Spectre in Dr. No is literally just like, we want to show people we're a force to be reckoned with. From Russia with Love, there's so much more going on with what they're trying to accomplish. It's a multifaceted approach, like you mentioned, and it's just a lot more compelling to have this organization that kind of shows a new level of ruthlessness and intelligence.
This one's played a lot more serious, and there's a lot of scenes that I'm like, this feels like it could be like a real spy drama. Think about the scene where he's sitting there, they're on the boat, and he's talking to her, and he's like, tell me about the Lektor, and give me all the details, and talk to this microphone. It just feels like a very real life type of spy film.
It's so early on in the history that it hasn't had time to become gimmicky or over the top or campy and self-referential and self-aware and goofy and all that. I will say, though, my little addendum to that scene is by far the funniest moment in the movie when they cut back to MI6 and everybody's listening.
Yeah.
And it's all men except for Moneypenny. When she says, "Oh, James, will you make love to me in London?"
James, will you make love to me all the time in England?
Day and night. Go on about the mechanism.
Yes, day and night. Now tell me about the Lektor. One thing missing, though, James Bond. There's no Bond James Bond.
It's not in the film.
I'm curious when that does come back. I'm assuming it's in Goldfinger.
It is.
Bond. James Bond.
When film critics talk about this film, I mean, a lot of people who love this film, again, it doesn't fall into the comic book-ness of the Bond franchise as much as some of the other ones. Now, there are. You get Spectre Island, you have the gadgets, but they're all pretty fairly realistic. Like, nothing seems to be out of, like, extraordinary. Like, we don't have any fucking invisible cars or anything at this point.
Yeah.
Even the villains, it's like the base of the villain is a fucking boat. Like, it's not like some elaborate thing.
Going forward, that's like my major criteria for ranking some of these are going to be like, is it a good film independent of the franchise? And I would say that's the number one reason why From Russia with Love beats Dr. No.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good movie. Even if it was purely standalone, there was never another Bond film made. If you didn't know who James Bond was, it's a good movie in and of itself.
Like we were saying last week, the opening was, like 75% there. This was a little cleaner. First off, still the same turn and shoot. It was not Connery, once again, which was odd. It's still his stunt double, and it was the same one. They didn't reshoot it or anything. So with this, we had gun barrel, but it had the Bond theme right away, into the prologue, and then the title sequence. So it's like we're getting a step closer, but the title sequence still didn't have the title song. It just played a little bit of it in an instrumental way, and then switched to the Bond theme. And then at the end of the film, we have our title song, our, From Russia with Love theme song. So it's like we're still getting there. Like we're still developing that formula.
Maurice Binder, who was in the last movie, he did the opening credit sequence, is replaced with his name's Robert Brownjohn. I just think it's a silly name. But he did the opening credit sequence to this film, which kind of sparks off the whole, naked ladies in the beginning of the film. I mean, yes, they're not naked, and it's kind of reminiscent of the gypsies with the belly dancing.
Scantily
and that
clad.
kind of thing. Scantily clad.
I mean, last time they were fully clothed. They had long skirts and full shirts and all that. With this, it's like, again, we're making baby steps, including this was our first legitimate prologue. A first little action sequence that takes place early on to get us in the mood, and then title sequence. So it's like that part of the formula is now secured.
I want to ask Nans a question. Nans, when you watched the beginning of this movie, were you shocked at first, or were you like, what's going on?
Again, this is Nathan, who has never seen most of these movies.
I wouldn't say shocked, like you mentioned, probably more along the lines of like, what's going on? Like, obviously, Bond isn't dying right now, but it was interesting to see the face rip. That was an extremely convincing prosthetic, I guess, or whatever you would call it.
It did almost look like they put more makeup on Bond to make him look a little weird.
Yes.
You got to wonder, though, why the mask? Like, I get that they're training him to one day kill Bond, but why have a James Bond mask? Is it like, now Grant, when you run into James Bond, he's really attractive, and it might throw you off the first time you see him. So we're going to put a real mask on this guy so that you don't immediately get I mean, if I saw James Bond in real life, my man crush would probably take over, and I'd probably end up being his bitch. I guess. I'd be like in Austin Powers,
Dr. Evil sent me here to kill you, but I find you so sexy and just make love to me. You are hairy like animals. Good, baby, very good. Make love to me, monkey man.
I can't kill you, James Bond. But they're like, now that's going to happen, so we're going to train that out of you by putting a mask on this random guy that you're going to murder.
I think it's a case of, can you look your enemy in the face once you actually see him and pull the trigger?
Or to encourage...
So they're training him with the face.
I would say it's to encourage
Did he even
target
see
recognition.
the face?
Yeah, target.
Yeah,
yes.
Throughout the entire film, he's actually protecting him for most of the movie. But to know his target,
learn to hate that face. Kill when you
know
see
that face.
So that took place on Spectre Island. Is that a thing? Mm-hmm. And does that ever come back?
Welcome to Spectre Island.
No, Spectre Island doesn't come back, but that scene, going through Spectre Island and you see everybody training, that whole scene was kind of inspired by the movie Spartacus, when you had all the gladiators, training.
There's an amazing part where a guy's learning how to shoot a flamethrower, but there's an actual man dodging the flamethrower at the back.
It's too bad Quarrel didn't receive that training.
Maybe it was himself.
He just, it's quite unfortunate for him.
I won't often bring up odd editing because, as we talked about last week, there's always odd edits and cheats that they do. They do purposeful jump cuts and they speed up stuff. They speed up the train a lot, even though it looks goofy. They still do it, so it's more exciting. But in that scene, I don't know if you noticed, but they literally extended the set by way of editing. So what they did was they walk in and we're tracking with them and we're seeing all these guys shooting and flamethrowing and all that. And then at the end of the scene, they walk frame right, but then they cut back to the wide shot of the whole scene, and it makes it look like they're walking into an entire new section of training, but really they're just walking into the same scene because you can see the layout of here's guys shooting on the range and then the flamethrower guy and then all the guys fighting each other. If you go back and watch that scene, they walk into the same scenario twice, but they made it look like it was a lot bigger, and that's how you stretch $2 million into what looks to be a lot bigger.
They did it pretty skillfully because I did not even remotely detect that.
Yeah.
Great sport, this.
What did you say?
I said it's great sport, this bunting.
I couldn't agree with him more.
That scene is where we first see James Bond in this movie, and it's 18 minutes in, and I was kind of curious. With Dr. No, Spectre's a much more like background mysterious type of thing, and in this film, we just see Spectre for like the first 18 minutes.
I agree with Charlie when he said early on, we were talking about how now this film doesn't end like Empire Strikes Back, but in the fact that this film is the revenge story for the villains. I feel like the villains are so much more in the forefront in this movie. You almost could argue that Bond isn't necessarily the main character in this movie. I mean, yeah, he is, but we spend so much time with Spectre and what their plan is.
Spectre drives the plot.
Exactly.
As opposed to Bond driving the plot.
It's kind of like the way people say that Infinity War was the Thanos movie,
Yeah,
right?
I agree,
Because we've already set up all the heroes. So Bond as a hero has already been set up. This is the Spectre movie that was hinted at in the same way that Thanos put on the glove or whatever in the first Avengers movie. Spectre was hinted at before, and now this is the first instance of guy who's not seen sitting around petting Mr. Bigglesworth. And go ahead, McCurdy.
All right. Charlie's been holding me back and be like, I'm not letting you talk about this until we come to it. It's not that big of a deal either, but... So the guy...
Yes, it is!
It's not that big a deal! It's not! So the actor who plays Blofeld in this movie, and if you see at the end of credits, they do call him Ernest Blofeld, but they put a question mark next to him, which is kind of an old movie thing. You'd see that a lot in older films. They did it with Karloff and Frankenstein. But Anthony Dawson, if you guys remember, as Patterson was pointing out last time, he gets brutally murdered by Bond. He played Professor Dent. This is that same actor. He's playing the stand-in for Blofeld. Now, he doesn't voice him, but in this film, he's playing Blofeld, and he is stroking that cat.
There's maybe one shot where you can just maybe tell from his profile. You just get a little piece of him, but you can...
With his hair, yeah.
Once you know that, you can kind of see, I guess that's him. I mean, the mystery's ruined forever, essentially.
Well, that's kind of the feeling I got with the whole Spectre Island. I was like... This feels silly seeing this little camp for all these guys to go train at.
Yeah, Spectre kind of works best when it's literally a Spectre, just a shadow that could be anywhere. They're everywhere at one time. And yeah, the guy, he's like, welcome to Spectre Island. Hey, our swimming pool is shaped like an octopus.
The first thing you should know about us is that we have people everywhere. Am I right?
Spectre works better when it is mysterious.
Yeah.
How good of a touch is the cocktail napkin at the beginning of the movie?
That stuff is perfect.
Where he sees...
That is perfect. That's what we're talking about.
Where he sees you are required at once in an octopus. That's just brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah. That kind of like, we're everywhere. Speaking of Marvel movies, that's what Hydra is. That's what Spectre is. They have... a tentacled octopus, or this mystical beast as their
mascot,
their coat of arms, because the literal Hydra mythical creature, you cut one of its heads off and two take its place. It's supposed to illustrate the fact that we are everywhere and you can't kill us. And so Spectre and Hydra are literally the same thing. And there's this shared sense of paranoia that they bring about because you never know where they are. But then when you show up to Spectre Island, it just kind of ruins that paranoid feeling of they're everywhere.
Make it an underground bunker, not like an island paradise.
Yeah.
I do have to give a shout out to Grant busting out the garroting wire, which is a pretty, literally metal way to try to kill somebody. Which, by the way, on my gadget ranking, garrote wire, from the wristwatch, that is currently top ranked gadget. That is solid shit.
Let's talk about the gadgets real quick. Desmond Llewelyn. This is his first appearance. You guys all realize that. This is the first time you see Q. Yep. They don't even mention him as Q. They just call him...
Ask the equipment officer to come in, please.
But in the credits, he is credited as Boothroyd. So yes, he hands him the special briefcase. It has 50 gold sovereigns. It has a knife, tear gas. The gun, it's an AR-7. Same people who make the AR-15, which is the civilian version of the M16. That's a real gun. You can actually buy that gun. And apparently it's one of the few guns that if you throw it in the water, it'll float. That's probably because the stock is much bigger than the actual mechanism itself.
Spectre always delivers what it promises.
Our whole organization depends on our keeping those promises.
The knife in the shoe, just such a badass.
Well, okay. The
Terrible.
knife in the shoe works for the frail old woman. But when you have the big Russian guy walk in with a fucking scar on his face, and he pulls a little knife out of his shoe,
and his
it's
feet
kind
are
of
like
weird.
that far apart.
Like, it looks silly, especially when, like, Clem is at the very end of the movie, is just, like, hobbling around with her fucking knife shoe and trying to
I
stab
actually
Bond.
really pity her. Every time I watch the movie, I actually feel really
Holding
bad
over
for
the
her.
chair.
She is Frau
So
Verbissina, right? That's where Frau Verbissina came from.
Mm-hmm.
But she's very tough and crazy the whole time, and then in that moment, she is out of her element physically, and she's absolutely f***ed, and I actually really pity her. Now, at least Bond didn't grab her by the throat and rip it out. You know, they gave that privilege to Romanova to go ahead and cap this bitch. But let me reiterate what I said about our Bond girls, where Ursula Andress is a f***ing badass. And anybody who knows me knows that I can't stand the fact that every movie has to be politicized, where it's, this movie stars a woman, and finally, we have a movie that stars a woman. And not just a woman, but a strong woman, and it completely fucking purposely forgets the fact that we've had strong women in film forever. Like, from the fucking outset of movies, we've had strong women. And look at this one. Look at this example. Not just Ursula Andress coming out of the ocean and pulling her knife on everybody, but you have the gypsy women who literally tear each other to pieces, and then they end up having a threesome with Bond.
A literal cat fight. They emphasize that. Like,
yes. And then you have Kleb, who is a badass in her own way, and she goes out fighting.
That's being
and then you have Romanova, who literally saves James Bond's life in two different ways. Yeah. She tackles her boss, throwing the gun on the floor. Then she picks up the gun and shoots her.
Yeah.
Every single woman in this movie is a badass, and still today people will be like, "Oh, it doesn't count."
Like,
that doesn't matter.
They're definitely still heavily sexualized, but you're right. Like, they also have a lot of agency.
If you don't think James Bond is heavily sexualized, James Bond doesn't have to take his clothes. He does take his clothes off regularly. The motherfucker is sexy. I mean, women don't really get off seeing naked men in the same way that men get off seeing naked women. Again, that's why the opening title sequences of these movies typically have naked women and fully clothed men. Women maybe like a guy's shirt coming off, but women don't like to see dicks as much as men like to see tits. And that's just the way it is. We all know that.
You hear women always talk nowadays, because it's a lost art, that goddamn men look good in a suit when they dress up properly.
Yeah.
That was just standardized back then.
Right now, I'm going to take a shot of Bond sitting at the casino, and I'm going to put it next to Ursula coming out of the ocean. Right? Those are equally sexy.
Yeah.
In two different ways, right?
Exactly.
Men want to see the woman already undressed.
Well.
Women want to see him after he's put his clothes back on.
Can I divulge into saying that I think for some weird reason I find that the neck, I don't even know what you call that necklace thing that she wears, I just find that sexy. What is that called? They talk about it in the film. They're like,
I meant to write it down, but that little.
They make such a big deal about it, but for some weird reason...
That is sexy.
It is. You give women, like, a little neck thing, and I'm like, that's kind of hot. I don't know why.
It's a choker,
I think especially on a Russian woman.
Exactly.
Oh, hell yeah.
You know? But on that note, though, about Kleb going out, that introduces, or that brings to the forefront our top Bond joke of this film, which really there's two. And I'm going to define Bond jokes as... a murder has to have just taken place, and then it's, a fun pun.
She's had her kicks.
So we have two in this movie. We have Kerim Bey gets revenge on Grushenko, shooting him as he's coming out of Anita Ekberg's mouth, and then Bond says, well, she should have kept her mouth shut. That's good. That's good.
Oh, it's
but
brilliant.
she's had her kicks is adequate.
And shortly following that, the emphasis continued on mouth.
I think my mouth is too big.
No, it's the right size.
Yeah.
In that moment, James Bond is confirming that he has a massive penis.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
I'm gonna be the nerd here and put my little nerd glasses on. Apparently, the poster that you see, the Bob Hope poster, right, with the mouth, is apparently another production that Eon Productions was working on at the same time. So they were like simultaneously like, hey, let's see this other movie that we have with Bob Hope.
I mean, they were a brand new company, so that's really brilliant cross promotion for like a fledgling film production company.
Yeah,
and let's be honest, if there was a real life man that was as big of a player as Bond, it was Bob Hope.
Why is their target crawling
until Will
out of
Chamberlain
her mouth?
came along?
Yeah.
Wait, Nan, say that again.
Why is the guy crawling out of the mouth of the sign in the first place?
Perfect.
It's his escape route, man.
Yeah.
Assuming that's like a little secret hideout for him, right? But to get in and out, or maybe just out, is obvious to everybody.
You would think that maybe he would have a safer escape hatch, or one that at least didn't render him completely vulnerable to attack.
A door with some stairs behind the sign, maybe?
That's a shitty escape route.
One more note, though, on the killing of Kleb. That is our first last bad guy standing scene, right? That becomes a Bond staple, which is you have boss, you have the muscle, and then you have, the lieutenant or whatever. So Grant has been taken care of. Blofeld is, untouchable at this point. But then we still have the lieutenant. We have the last bad guy standing to take care of, who comes to the hotel room and pretends to be a maid. That's usually what it is it's, we forgot about this bad guy, who now comes back right at the end, right when Bond is celebrating and getting his and all that shit. And they show up pretending to be, whatever. They come in disguise.
Usually, yeah.
Oh, yeah. They, and again, this is, we just keep pointing to Austin Powers tropes that point this stuff out. She comes in as a maid and tries to steal the Lektor, and then it'd be like if the boat captain came back at the end of Dr. No and was like, I came back with the dogs,
In our first episode, we touched on the main bad guy has some sort of weakness or something that James takes advantage of to defeat him or her. I didn't notice anything like that in this one.
No.
Kleb had tiny legs. Couldn't reach him.
She needed that from Street Fighter, Chun-Li. She needed that Chun-Li.
Yeah. Ha! Yeah. How about similarities between the first film and this film? Airports and ending with boats.
And sex on a boat at the very end.
Yeah, pretty much.
Basically, yeah.
Always sex on a boat.
It's literally the most limp-wristed thing James Bond has ever done. When at the end he's
like, bye.
That's how the prom queen waves, in the parade, like that.
The Princess Diana, like
that was brilliant.
You know what? It's really funny is like I don't think there's a single Bond film that Bond is threatened with a sex tape.
You would think it would happen all the time.
Right. Never happens in any other film. They got in a lot of trouble with that scene. Not the initial meeting of her and she coming in and then like they're kissing on the bed, but it was mainly because we go behind the mirror and you see, Clems with the cameraman filming it. And apparently the censors were like, what the f***? They're making a porno in your movie?
Yeah.
They were not happy with that.
Don't they know what blackmail is?
It's amazing.
Come on.
I mean, I can't imagine, like, going forward that Bond's reaction to being threatened with a sex tape is just be like, yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
People would be privileged to see that.
You gotta figure
filmed that.
You gotta figure the henchmen were excited.
Could I watch
He
that?
called, he's like, are there any other rooms available? And they're like, only the bridal suite. And the henchmen are going, yes.
Well, that's the thing. Did they then have to take all the recording equipment and move it to the bridal suite? Or did they put very obvious bugs in his room so that he would call, so that then they could move him to the bridal suite? That probably makes more sense.
Kill him and then make money off of the porn.
Well, and Scott, you were talking about similarities. Like I said last time, this was a trope in the films where you see him going through his room and doing this spy thing where he's like taking hairs out,
love that.
putting them, and then like checking for bugs and stuff. And they don't do it in all the later films, but many of the early ones you'll see that because it's kind of something that real spies had to do.
Well, it was interesting on this one that the whole time he was checking for bugs, they had the theme going. It wasn't
I was gonna mention
quiet.
that.
You know,
Was
it was
odd.
just the whole day he's walking around. It's like, and he's just looking behind stuff. You know?
Under the phone.
Yeah. I will say when he is first given this task.
No, it's some sort of trap.
Well, obviously it's a trap.
Once again, just like in Dr. No, where Bond sees a trap and he allows himself to jump into the trap. Patterson, go ahead and quote Dune.
Knowing there's a trap is the first step in evading it.
Yes. So in this...
My reading of the British mentality is that they always treat a trap as a challenge.
The English love a good trap,
British
basically,
love
which is
traps.
hilarious. And what's really interesting is that Bond actually reacted to that photograph of Romanova. You would think that he'd look at it like blah, 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 and then you'd think he'd just be like, you know, like he was looking at a Playboy. But he looked at her photograph and was almost love-struck, which was
he did say
very
she
odd.
was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen.
You're one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen.
Thank you.
Do you
So
think he
maybe
meant
it was-
that?
Yeah.
But I
Put
think
short,
it's just everything.
She is desperately in love with him,
Yeah.
and it's not reciprocated.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Right?
Maybe they didn't let you in on all of it, but whatever you do know, tell me.
I know I love you, James. I love you.
Just tell me.
I love you. I love you. It's true.
Sure.
I mean, my point is that he plays the whole thing very professionally throughout, but there are moments where he's not quite as stoic as he should be. I mean, even things like he's on to Grant at the end. He's on to him. He's already questioning him. And then when he gets the butt of a gun to the back of the neck, and then he wakes up and he looks at him like that. Again, it's almost like, depending on who's playing Bond, they're kind of stoic in situations like that.
I always like to say that the better Bond films, and this film's kind of the exception to the rule, but the better Bond films tend to display some kind of humanity in Bond, where Bond isn't a superhero. And when I say that, I mean like not that he has superpowers, but that nothing really phases him. He's like, as you guys were saying, he's stoic.
He has moments of vulnerability.
Yeah, he's vulnerable.
Yeah.
He's not, and you see it in this movie. But like you said, he doesn't fall for the girl. The emotional stakes aren't quite as there as some of the other films are.
I prefer stoic Bond. I prefer Ice in His Veins Bond, and it's not just because it's superhero stuff, but because that's how James Bond copes with the world he lives in. He knows that he can't really have a comfortable home life and be a secret agent. It's one or the other, and being emotionally unavailable is how he survives within that world. He's like Spock. He understands that in this spy world context, emotionality is the first thing that's going to get you killed.
How can you act like this? How can you be so cold?
It's what keeps me alive.
It's kind of shown over time that Bond loves pussy, but he will always take the kill over pussy.
My escape route's only for one. What are you after? The girl or the Lektor?
He never falls for her. I mean, again,
Yeah.
you would think that when he looked at that photograph, he would go, oh, she's f***ing hot. But you wouldn't think that he would react to it like, whoa.
I get the feeling that he's overcompensating towards professionalism, like throughout the dialogue. He's like, no, let's keep to the point. Business now, pleasure later. And he's like forcing himself to stick to that.
My friend, she's got you dangling.
That doesn't matter. All I want is that Lektor.
All? Are you sure that's all you want?
Well.
And imagine if it would have been more like a Casino Royale, Eva Green, where he did fall for her. That makes sense in the James Bond origin story that is Casino Royale, but in the context of this film, it would be a complete misstep if Bond fell for her. Scott, as the man ranking all the music, what takes the top spot? From Russia with Love or Three Blind Mice?
I don't know. Honestly, if you're comparing the two, Dr. No is convoluted, but it's a more interesting intro song. But if you take Matt Monroe just a genius of his time, and I've loved this man for years.
Wait,
Brilliant voice.
Is that the guy who sung the song from Rush
Yeah,
with
go
Love?
into that,
Yes.
because what would you say he was like today? Or, like, you know, talk about that.
Matt Monroe was very similar to, if you had to make a popular connection, the Rat Pack. Like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, the classic voice. And Matt Monroe has stayed just brilliant throughout the ages. Dr. No didn't have a voice to it. It was John Barry in the background. But Matt Monroe on this song was just brilliant. If you listen to it, it's so simply brilliant.
That's what's kind of tragic, though, about putting his song
at
the very end.
I hate it.
Is
I
that
hate it.
what they kind of realized, I think, at some point was, these songs are really good.
Yeah,
Let's
we need to get a
put it at the
proper
front
singer.
so everybody
Let's get
hears it,
people's
because, you know,
attention.
wait,
Yeah.
we have a title sequence, and everybody's heard the James Bond theme, and in fact, we play the James Bond theme throughout the movie. Let's put this kick-ass song by
Matt Monroe.
By Matt Monroe
Yeah.
at the outset, you know? And
Yeah.
but instead, you know, this being only the second film, they opted once again to have they played a little bit of From Russia with Love, just the instrumental, and then they just do the James Bond theme, which every time I hear the James Bond theme, I'm jacked up and ready to go. But again, what they realized was, let's do the original song, and then throughout the film, when Bond is firing a gun out of each hand and, you know, jumping away from an explosion, we'll play you know.
Why don't you just shoot him now? I mean, I'll go get a gun. We'll shoot him together. It'll be fun. Bang!
Blofeld, who's our faceless, nameless man at the head of Spectre petting the cat, we have him saying,
I'm going to place him in an easily escapable situation involving an overly elaborate and exotic death.
Kill him in an overly elaborate and exotic death. Like, he straight up says, I want Bond's death to be unpleasant and humiliating. Like, you know, don't just go up and shoot him in the face.
Let his death be a particularly unpleasant and humiliating one.
If they would have done some classic Bond execution thing, right? Like, I'm slowly going to drop you into the lava or whatever. That would be the whole embarrassing and humiliating thing that he's talking about. But here's what's kind of funny. What was their plan to kill Bond?
Here's a roll of film. She'll have this in her handbag. And on you, you'll find this letter. It's from her, threatening to give the film to the press unless you marry her for helping you get the Lektor. British agent murders beautiful Russian spy, then commits suicide.
The embarrassment they had planned for James Bond was that a female was going to take him out. It's like they knew Bond intimately.
Must be a pretty sick collection of minds to dream up a plan like that.
I want to talk a bit about our bad guy, Grant, who, again, is introduced right away, and we follow him throughout, as opposed to Dr. No, who's just kind of a mysterious figure who we meet towards the end of the film, and then he is quickly ousted. Grant's interesting because, again, he is... we have Kleb, who was part of SMERSH.
How does it feel, old man?
Old man? Is that what you chaps in SMERSH call each other?
SMERSH?
Of course. Spectre.
We've talked about before, which means Schmiert Spionum, which means death to spies. So she leaves SMERSH and she joins Spectre. It seems as if Spectre is all Russians. Like, there's just like this heavy Russian element to Spectre, even though it's global. And
I'll point out
Spectre
this.
is literally the most diverse organization on the planet. Like,
I'll point
they're
this out,
literally
Charles.
everywhere.
We're in the Cold War, right? Salzman and Cubby, they were also one of these people that, and I think this is true for a lot of filmmakers. I mean, people didn't want to go to war. We didn't want to go to World War III. I think part of it was that they did not want to make the villains in this film necessarily Russians. And I think that's true for a lot of Hollywood movies up throughout the Cold War, is kind of finding a surrogate enemy.
Kind of like Dr. No in the last film.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that Spectre is largely made up by Russians, right? And they make a point of being like, East or West, I don't care.
Did they ever reference where he came from? Because he plays an English character. And then when he drops that character,
he's Russian.
He's very well spoken in English.
Where did they reference him as Russian? I don't think he's Russian.
Where do they say that?
Donald Grant, convicted murderer,
Escaped Dartmoor prison in 1960, recruited in Tangier in 1962.
His name is Donald Red Grant.
Yeah, he's not Russian.
I guess
and
I have
purposed him
always
as
assumed
an
he's
agent
Russian,
for
but-
Spectre. He's not.
No,
he's not. But
on
they never say
Wikipedia,
where
it
he's
says
from.
he's an Irish assassin, but I don't think it comes up in the film.
Yeah, I don't think.
I don't think
comes
it's
up.
relevant,
We don't
to
know
be
where he's
honest
from,
with
but
you.
he's very obviously British.
Sir, do you mind if we have a bite to eat first? I've been on the go since breakfast.
From how well he plays the character, and then to his normal voice when he drops, "I'm the overly British agent." Character. He still sounds
again,
very
he
British.
he was pretending to be Bond's contact.
Yeah.
So he was
Yeah,
he was
but
being
even
very
once
British.
he drops that, he still sounds very
But
British.
Bond makes the thing that turns Bond onto the idea that this guy may be playing a part is the fact that he's very much not British because he drinks red wine with fish.
You may know the right wines. The other one on your knees.
Yeah.
So,
But he's not Russian.
So you're saying he's Irish? Well, wouldn't Irish have?
An Irishman would have a fucking ale with his fish.
Regardless of what he had, I think the idea is that, like, yeah, it's a tell for Bond to realize, like, oh, this guy's not.
He's certainly not
proper
a
Irishman.
proper
Regardless
English.
of that, I think
He's
the
literally
point
no
is,
true Scotsman.
No, I think the point is just that he is a part of this organization whose sole purpose really is to screw over the West and the East into getting into war for their own profit, for their own profiteering. And he's just so happens to be an agent of this. And I don't think he has any kind of affiliation or country. And I think in these films specifically, they kind of make that into a good person would have some kind of patriotism. They would have some kind of stance on their country that they're from, like whether it's the United States or the United Kingdom. But for a criminal, for a villain, they don't have any attachments to their country. They have no patriotism.
Here's the thing about Grant. You know, he has this kick-ass line.
My orders are to kill you and deliver the Lektor. How I do it's my business.
What's interesting, though, is that he seems very much like Bond, right? Where the mission is everything. You know, hey, Bond, what do you care about, the woman or the mission? Well, I care about the mission. It's the old school, I mean, they even make fun of it in Austin Powers, we're not so different, you and I.
We're not so different, you and I.
You always have to show that fine line between the good guy and the bad guy.
You work for peanuts. A hearty well done from Her Majesty the Queen and a pittance of a pension. Apart from that, we are the same.
Which is, you know, to get all philosophical about it, that's the duality of man, right? You have man can be both a divine creator and a satanic destroyer, right? And, you know, something pulls us in one way, in one direction or another.
The successful criminal brain is always superior. It has to be. Why become criminal?
And as we know, as history has told us, James Bond doesn't give a shit about an individual woman. He cares about the mission. He is obsessed. He's like, it's like hunters, you know. It's like, would you rather get pussy or kill something? And they're like, I'd rather kill something. Bond is a hunter. Grant is a hunter. They are obsessed with the mission. The mission means everything to people like this. So it's kind of odd that, I mean, what is the downfall of Grant? Greed.
How about a cigarette?
Not a chance.
I'll pay for it.
For some reason, Grant's like, ooh, money?
Gold
Why would he
sovereign.
care? Why does Grant, who this whole time has been obsessed with this mission, he's literally been saving James Bond's life over and over and over. He's been making sure this entire story that Bond succeeds in getting the Lektor so that he can take advantage of that situation. And his downfall is some gold?
Because he was a past criminal. He was a criminal before he became an agent.
But wouldn't he forego some money for the sake of accomplishing this mission?
I kind of agree with Charlie. It doesn't quite make sense with his character.
Especially within that same scene, James is like, what are they paying you? I'll double it.
How much are they paying you?
What's it to you?
We'll double it.
Your word of honor? As an English gentleman?
And he's like, nah, I'm good.
Exactly.
Yeah, he
for a
literally
cigarette.
just
okay.
declined an offer for more money.
Yeah, because as we know about James Bond makes $50,000 a year, but all the same, he's there out of patriotism. He's not there for money. Even though he gets to spend a ton of money while he's on the job. So it is odd that Grant would betray his sense of mission for 50 gold sovereigns or whatever. I mean, he could go anywhere and he could kill anybody that has 1,000 gold sovereigns and not give a shit. So it is weird. He's a great bad guy, but that is kind of a fatal flaw with him. It almost would have been better had there been something very important that he needed that was in the case that wasn't money, right? Like, I need the X, and, well, the X is in my case. Oh, I'll get it. No.
Charlie.
Keep your hands in your pockets, and I'm going to get X out of the case. You know what I mean? That would have really made Grant perfect. But at the end of the day, if we're ranking bad guys, Grant is a superior bad guy to Dr. No, because Dr. No just was... we talked about, he had metal hands that didn't really go anywhere. Like, he was a cool idea, but he wasn't fully exercised. Whereas Grant is very unique in terms of all bad guys, in the sense that he's a bad guy who's literally tasked with saving Bond repeatedly until right at the end, Bond's performed his function, and then they're just going to fucking kill him in cold blood. But then he sells out right at the last minute. So he's not the greatest bad guy of all time, but he's certainly at the top of our list.
I would also point out that one thing about the franchise that, like, this dawned on me as I was watching the movie, is that Spectre underestimates Bond, right, at every turn, because they think that, like, oh, he's just a stupid, like, Dr. No, it's oh, you're just a stupid policeman. And in, like, what I think even in the real world we would just assume is, like, oh, you have a gun, a badge, maybe, whatever. But, like, Bond has, and an extension to Universal Sports or MI6, they have the Q branch. And you have these gadgets, these spy gadgets, that actually give him the upper hand in a lot of situations. And it just so happens that it's like, yeah, I've got this nice little, this briefcase here that's got 50 gold sovereigns in it. Oh, also it's got a fucking tear gas bomb and a knife and all this other shit in it. And I
love that. I'm saying I love that. I'm saying my problem is that
that he goes for the 50 gold sovereigns.
His motivation to get into the suitcase should have been strictly for his mission. It is a lazy betrayal of his character because it was never established that he's corruptible by way of money. He's supposed to be above that. It should have been, my motivation to get into this briefcase is to complete my mission, not to get 50 gold sovereigns, because who cares?
Again, he is an... I'm trying to think of the world.
If the fucking Lektor could have fit into the briefcase, that would have been
perfect. He is a previous criminal.
But as Nance pointed out,
murder,
he had a better repurposed. The offer that Bond made him moments before would have inevitably been better than what he was offered.
No, it's literally. I
agree.
It's literally. Do you want a mound of gold? And he's like, no, I don't. How about 50 gold sovereigns?
Oh,
which is like this much gold. And he's like, really? Like, it's literally the why have billions when I could have
I get it.
millions?
There's holes. There's holes there. But he is a previous criminal, convicted of murder.
It still doesn't add up. I get he used to be a criminal, but it doesn't add up that Bond says, Bond's like, we'll give you $1 billion. And he's like, no.
It doesn't add up.
We'll give you $5. And he's like,
well, okay, so what I'm going back to the briefcase.
Out of a previous criminal murder.
That's if you tell me,
but Charlie,
if 50 gold sovereigns is the same thing as 50 Bitcoin, I would understand. But until a gold sovereign is $1 million, it's bullshit that he would opt for that versus
Charlie, go back to
worth back then.
Let me throw this out. Let me throw this out. Going back to the fact that he's giving the Q branch thing that I was going on to. Like, he gives him he's like, here's 50 gold sovereigns. But like, if I'm a secret agent, I don't really realize that like MI6 agents have these fucking ridiculous gadgets, right? And I'm just like, oh, it's a fucking briefcase. He's probably got 15 gold sovereigns in there. Not realizing that there's the trap of having tear gas bomb in it and, you know, clipping on the latches or whatever the f*** it is in the movie. Like, I'm going to kill this guy anyway. I'm going to get 50 gold sovereigns and kill this guy. Like, it's just a bonus, you know, at that point. So I could see someone being like, I'm still in the mission.
But that's
I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna get the f***ing extra gold sovereigns out of this. Yeah, sure. Let me go get those 50 gold sovereigns.
Which is fine. If he said, if Bond said, "How about a cigarette?" He's like, "Absolutely not. I'll buy it." Okay, with what? I have 50 gold sovereigns. Okay, shoot Bond in the face, and then he has. Remember, there are 2 briefcases.
Yeah,
not just one. There are 2 because he has the contacts briefcase and his own. So Bond opens up his own,
into the next
pulls out and he was like. He's like, are there more in the other one? He's like, oh, there's a standard case. And then he's like, let me open this one. It just doesn't add up that he would take that risk.
No,
right?
but that's the basis of simple spy films from the old times.
Yes, but we're not talking about tropes.
I'm not going to kill him immediately. I'm going to put him into a tank with sharks with laser beams.
We're talking about motivation. Bad guys like Blofeld
they
is
never
motivated
take the shot and do the obvious thing.
But Blofeld
We're going in circles at this point.
Yeah, but
Scott makes a good point. We are
Scott's
going
not understanding what I'm talking about. We're not talking about.
Pedro.
I'm specifically talking about motivation.
Pedro.
Motivation is everything. If the entire time Grant was like a selfish asshole,
I won't kill him right now. I'll put him in a contrived prison. I'll put him in a prison with a vent where he can escape and ultimately kill me.
I just love. Hold on, stop. I love how Patterson's just like, guys.
Scott, you're making a false equivalency. It's not
All
the
right,
same
Charlie,
thing.
Scott,
We're talking
shut the
about motivation. We're specifically talking about character motivation. This guy was never motivated by he was motivated by mission. For him to completely sell out in order to get 100 gold sovereigns doesn't make sense when the guy is just like James Bond. Bond doesn't give a shit about money. Bond cares about the mission. He doesn't give a shit about pussy. He cares about the mission. He will kill every bitch that comes across his path. He literally sometimes throws money into fire and water because he doesn't give a f***. He only cares about his mission, and the fact that this guy sold out his mission for 100 gold sovereigns doesn't make a f***ing ounce of sense.
It was written
but anyway,
so he could escape.
I'm going to railroad this all the way to the end. Motherfucking Pedro Armendáriz. Pedro Armendáriz died for this fucking movie. He's not some pussy ass like Dr. No who fake had radiation poisoning and lost his hands. Pedro actually got radiation poisoning and he fucking died for it. The guy killed himself because of radiation.
To where this podcast
Cheers
goes,
to Pedro.
I'm so
to Pedro.